Welcome to the deep dive. If you're joining us right now, chances are the clock has probably long since crossed midnight. The noise of the day, the emails, the demands, that constant low hum of society, it's finally gone quiet.
By
And
now.
you might be in this pocket of deep, unexpected creativity. Or maybe you're just staring at the shadows on your wall, engaged in a highly detailed and extremely unhelpful review of every single life decision you've ever made.
And that phenomenon, that feeling, the mind unlocking just as the world is locking down, that's really the core of what we're getting into in this deep dive.
Right.
We're asking a really fundamental question, I think. Is the modern way we sleep, this consolidated, perfect 8-hour block that the 9-to-5 world demands, is it actually fighting against our natural, evolved human design?
Are we just biologically out of sync with the daytime world?
Exactly.
Because that feeling, that sense of being a biological outlier, thinking, I know I should be asleep, but I feel more awake right now, more capable of tackling a complex thought than I did at noon.
Yes, that's the feeling.
That's what we need to unpack. We've taken a deep stack of sources for this one, and they span everything from ancient human history and studies of hunter-gatherer groups, all the way to the deep neurobiology of anxiety, corporate culture, and the pretty brutal psychological realities of the mind after midnight.
So our mission really is to trace this conflict. We're going to start with the genetic code that actually sets your internal clock, then move through the historical evidence for fragmented, sort of multi-block sleep patterns.
Which is fascinating.
It is, and then we'll bring it right up to the modern office, where sticking to a 9-to-5 schedule can actually be, detrimental to your health and even your career.
We're going to look at what happens when your powerful, genetically fixed internal timing just slams up against the factory-set social clock.
Yeah, we've got a lot to cover.
So let's start with the immediate, almost visceral appeal of it. Why, for so many people, does late night feel like reclaimed time?
I think the first and probably the most obvious attraction is just the sheer draw of solitude.
The quiet.
The quiet. It's that practical appeal of just having fewer external distractions.
Yeah.
Think about the sensory environment of a typical day.
It's a constant barrage.
It is. You've got the pings, the emails, the phone calls, the impromptu meetings, and that's before you even get to the general noise of traffic or, crowds. All of it is constantly fragmenting your attention.
And fragmentation is the absolute enemy of focus, isn't it? You just cannot enter a state of deep, sustained focus, what people call flow, when your digital tether is vibrating every 5 minutes, pulling you right back into the immediate social sphere.
You can't. And the quiet environment of the night allows for that deep, uninterrupted concentration. The world slows down. For creative work, for problem solving, or really any task that requires you to actually concentrate, this quiet isn't just preferable, it's essential.
It's like your brain finally gets permission to just settle down, to ignore all that external input and actually process something.
Yes, exactly. And this sense of relief, it's particularly strong if you lean more towards introversion.
Oh, for sure. The daytime can feel like a high-fidelity sensory overload for introverts. It's just a constant drain of required social interaction, noise, crowds.
That's a great way to put it. The solitude of night acts as a profound filter. We know that introverts are often very easily overstimulated.
Right.
So when the external world finally silences, the internal world can at last be heard clearly. For anyone prone to overthinking, this is when they can finally untangle those really complicated thought knots.
Thought knots, I like that.
Yeah, those knots that the daytime chaos just prevented them from focusing on. It's when introspection isn't constantly being interrupted by some other obligation.
I found this really fascinating description in one of the sources we looked at. It suggested that some introverts actually use the late hours specifically to hermit to their heart's content.
I love that.
It's almost like a protective mechanism. You can get into that creative flow state. You can roam your house. You can think. You can just be without any fear of having to engage with anyone socially. The cloak of night provides this kind of psychological armor and peace.
And this leads us to a emotional driver for staying up late, which has become a really recognizable cultural phenomenon around the world.
Revenge bedtime procrastination.
Revenge bedtime procrastination, or RBP. The phrase actually comes from a Chinese term, bofushan aye, and it captures the sentiment perfectly.
That translation is incredible. Revenge bedtime, staying up late. It perfectly encapsulates the feeling, doesn't it? You are consciously, or maybe unconsciously, delaying sleep, even when you know you need it. just to reclaim this tiny pocket of personal time that was completely lost during a stressful, controlled, or just burnout-inducing day.
It is the ultimate act of defiant freedom against the tyranny of the clock. It stems directly from stress, from anxiety, or just that feeling that the daylight hours were not your own.
So you feel driven to take revenge on daytime stress by seizing the night.
You do. It's a powerful motivation. But the irony of it is, well, it's deeply painful.
Because this act of personal freedom almost always relies on the very technology that harms our SME the most.
Electronic devices.
Yeah. When you engage in RBP, you're exposing your eyes to all that blue light and your brain to all that mental stimulation right before you're supposed to be winding down.
And that blue light exposure, it's not a small thing. It actively suppresses melatonin production.
Which is the hormone that basically tells your body, hey, it's time to sleep now.
Exactly. So you disrupt your body's biological clock, which just prolongs your sleep deficit. You are literally trading this temporary feeling of mental relief for lower efficiency, more stress, and more anxiety the next day.
Which, of course, just leads to a stronger desire for RBP the following night.
You get locked in this vicious, self-perpetuating cycle of counterproductive freedom.
It's trading long-term well-being for just a brief moment of feeling like you're in control. But beyond the procrastination, there is a purely physical phenomenon a lot of people experience. This burst of energy right when they feel they should be crashing.
That's a real biological mechanism.
Yeah.
It's driven by what we call the circadian alerting system.
Okay.
Your internal clock, and this is regardless of whether you're a night owl or a morning lark, it's often programmed to deliver a natural little energy bump in the early evening or late at night.
A second wind.
It is a second wind. It's a final push of alertness that's designed to keep you functional just a little bit longer before the major flood of melatonin really kicks in. It explains why 11 p.m. can suddenly feel like you're wide awake again, making the pull of sleep that much easier to ignore.
So whether it's the quiet or the emotional need for space or this final biological surge, the midnight hour can feel profoundly fertile. But society doesn't really care about your second wind, does it?
No.
Society cares about the 8 a.m. meeting.
And that contrast, this ancient innate drive versus the modern industrial schedule, that is the core tension we really have to analyze here.
Okay, so where do we start?
We have to start by establishing the sheer antiquity of the biological clock.
Our circadian rhythm. It's an evolutionary masterpiece, really. Every organism, from a single-celled bacteria all the way up to us, has this internal timekeeping system.
Evolved over millennia to adapt to the Earth's rotation, which, fun fact, is actually closer to 24 hours minus about 4 minutes.
And the central timekeeper for this whole system is housed in a tiny little cluster of neurons in the brain.
Yeah, it's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN. Some people call it the body's master clock. And this SCN is constantly being synchronized, primarily by light signals, the shifts from dark to day.
Let's maybe dig a little deeper into how the SCN registers light, because it's not just the standard light receptors in your eyes that we use for vision.
That's right, it's a different system. The SCN gets its input from these really specialized light sensors in the retina called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, or IPRGCs for short. And these cells, they don't help you see images. They just detect ambient light intensity, particularly in the blue-green part of the spectrum.
Which is exactly the kind of light that our phone and computer screens emit.
Exactly the kind. When these cells detect that light, they send a signal to the SCN, which then instructs the pineal gland to suppress the release of melatonin.
And that suppression is the direct physical link between you looking at your phone at midnight and feeling less sleepy.
That's the mechanism right there.
So the SCN is ancient, it's precise, and it's fixed. And crucially, where your individual clock is set, whether you're a morning person or a night person, that is largely genetic.
It is deeply, deeply rooted in your genetics. Studies, especially ones that compare identical and fraternal twins, show that your chronotype is up to 50% heritable.
50%? That's a huge number.
It is. It means it's a natural, continuous variation based on the DNA you inherited. It is not a choice. It's not a character flaw.
And the other 50%?
That comes from environmental factors. Things like light exposure, your age, your behavior. But that genetic blueprint is undeniable.
So if it's 50% genetic, that means we are literally hardwired for diversity in our sleep timing. But now, let's contrast that ancient biology with the modern rhythm of life.
The modern rhythm is a purely social construct. I mean, for most of human history, time was measured by the sun and by the seasons.
Simple. Natural.
Right. But the modern work schedule, That was forged by the Industrial Revolution, by the need to synchronize a huge non-agricultural workforce. The time we use today was shaped by factory bells, by train schedules, by school bells.
All external devices designed to force human biology into a kind of mechanical uniformity.
It's the moment we traded solar time for social time. And unfortunately, the architecture of our modern life, the transport systems, the schools, the corporate schedules, it all still runs on that rigid industrial era social time.
Mostly optimized for that 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. window.
And this conflict has massive consequences because chronotypes are not just about when you prefer to wake up. They dictate when your brain is optimally performing specific kinds of tasks.
Okay, let's clearly define these functional differences because I think this is where companies and individuals make the biggest mistakes.
Let's start with the early birds, or the morning chronotypes. Their peak productivity naturally falls from early morning to mid-morning, maybe 7 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Okay.
And their cognitive peak is excellent for routine, highly structured or straightforward tasks. Things where consistency and getting it done early are key.
And what do the studies tell us about their performance profile during the day?
Well, in terms of workplace metrics, studies show that early birds start the day with very high vitality, that feeling of being physically energized and alive. But that vitality decreases noticeably as the day goes on. What's interesting, though, is their capacity for learning new complex skills remains relatively stable throughout the day, even as their physical energy drops.
So they're like the dependable engine that runs consistently early on. They're often the deducers, the civil servants, the accountants.
That's a good way to think about it. Now, compare that to the night owls, the late chronotypes.
Their natural peak is dramatically shifted. We're talking late evening into the early morning, 8 p.m. to maybe 3 a.m.
Right. And the night owl's cognitive profile is geared toward complexity and deep thinking later in their cycle. Their personality often leans toward extroversion, creativity, and divergent thinking.
These are the poets, the artists, the late-night coders, the inventors.
Exactly. And their professional performance data is almost the inverse of the morning types.
How so?
Well, their feeling of vitality tends to remain pretty stable throughout the day. They don't necessarily get that big initial rush, but they also don't fade as rapidly.
Okay.
But crucially, their capacity for learning and processing complexity actually increases as the day moves toward the evening.
So forcing them to tackle a big, complicated strategic planning task at 9 a.m. is fundamentally hitting them when their brain is still, operating suboptimally.
Suboptimally is a polite way to put it. You are actively accepting a lower quality of performance from a huge segment of your most creative, complex thinking workforce.
And the personal cost of this misalignment must be profound.
It is. And it's quantified most commonly as social jet lag.
Social jet lag.
It's the measurable discrepancy between the rigid social schedule work, school, and your actual genetically preferred internal timing. And it is an epidemic. Some studies suggest up to 70% of the population experiences at least 1 hour of social jet lag every week.
That sounds like you're flying from New York to London and back every single weekend, but without the fun of a vacation?
A very good analogy. And the tangible health risks associated with it they're severe.
Okay, what are we talking about?
Research shows that for every single hour of social jet lag, you have an 11% greater risk of heart disease.
Wow, 11% per hour.
Per hour. And that's independent of how much sleep you actually get. It's a massive compounding risk over a lifetime.
That is incredibly sobering.
And it doesn't stop there. Social jet lag is strongly correlated with metabolic dysfunction, so a higher prevalence of diabetes and obesity. The misalignment chronically disrupts the body's hormonal balance.
How does it do that?
It decreases leptin, which is the hormone that makes you feel full. It increases insulin resistance. It raises your mean arterial pressure. Essentially, ignoring your internal clock just makes you systematically sicker over time.
And if being sick wasn't enough, there's the social penalty that's built right into the workplace, the early riser bias.
Oh, yes. It's a cultural perception, and it's deeply ingrained in traditional organizations that equates arriving early with being diligent, committed, and reliable.
So it's a bias that just unfairly rewards morning chronotypes simply for being visibly active during the assumed right hours.
Exactly. The night owl who works intensely from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. is often penalized or perceived as less committed, even if their actual output and cognitive performance during those hours far surpasses the early bird's 9 a.m. routine work.
So it's a bias that's rooted in visibility, not productivity. We're penalizing circadian diversity at the exact time when modern knowledge work demands maximum flexibility and output.
hmm Which really confirms the urgent need for structures that respect this biology. We'll talk about that later when we get to chrono leadership.
Okay, so before we get to the modern solutions, you mentioned digging even deeper into why this consolidated sleep might feel so unnatural, going backward in time.
Yes, by looking at our ancestors.
So this idea that we should all sleep in one perfect 8-hour block, it's so ingrained in us we treat anything else as a failing. But what if fragmented sleep is actually the default setting rooted in our evolution?
That takes us straight to the Sentinel hypothesis. This theory fundamentally re-examines the whole purpose of chronotype diversity. I mean, sleep is critical for our brains to restore and consolidate memories, but it's also a period of extreme vulnerability.
Right, to predators, to environmental dangers, to rival groups.
If everyone in the group is fast asleep at the exact same time, you have zero defense. You're a sitting duck.
So the hypothesis is that human groups evolved this natural variety in chronotypes as a survival mechanism.
To ensure continuous group vigilance, by having some members naturally active early and others active late, the group basically ensures that one or more individuals are awake at any given time, functioning as sentinels.
This theory was tested, right, with the Hadza hunter-gatherers in Tanzania.
It was a brilliant study. This is a population that lives without electricity, so it gives us a window into what ancestral sleep might have actually looked like.
And the results were...
The results were stunning, and they were highly supportive of this sentinel role. The researchers tracked the sleep-wake cycles of the Hadza subjects over a period of 20 days. And the findings revealed that all subjects were simultaneously scored as being asleep for a combined total of only 18 minutes.
18 minutes over the entire 20-day span.
Total, across the entire study period.
That is almost impossible to get your head around in our modern context, where we're all demanding 8 consolidated hours a night.
It speaks volumes about the constant, asynchronous nature of their rest. The data confirmed that at least one person, and often more, was awake or in a very light state of alertness during 99.8% of the entire nighttime period.
The nighttime period being defined from when the first person fell asleep to when the last person woke up.
Correct. The village was, for all intents and purposes, never entirely vulnerable.
And this continuous vigilance was tied to inherent biological differences, wasn't it? Not just random waking.
Yes. The researchers found that chronotype variation linked to age played a significant role. Older individuals often tend toward earlier chronotypes.
They wake up earlier, more frequently.
Right, so they may have functioned naturally as these wakeful elders, essentially standing guard passively during the early morning hours when the younger, later chronotypes were still in their deepest sleep.
So if you're someone who wakes up constantly at 4 a.m. feeling anxious, it could just be your deeply inherited ancestral duty to go check the savannah for lions.
It's a powerful reframing of what we now call insomnia, isn't it?
It really is.
And we can actually quantify this natural broken sleep using a technical metric. It's called wake after sleep onset, or WASO.
Okay, what is that?
It's simply a measure of the total time you spend awake between the moment you first fall asleep and the moment you wake up for the day.
So what were the differences in WASO between industrial populations like us and non-industrial populations like the Hadza?
The contrast is dramatic. Studies comparing the Hadza and the Malagasy, another non-industrial group, to industrialized groups in the U.S. show that the Hadza had a WASO of about 2.4 hours per night.
2.5 hours of being awake during the night?
On average. Now, that is almost 4 times the amount experienced by the modern U.S. population, which had a WASO of only 0.69 hours.
So less than 45 minutes.
Correct. This means ancestral life inherently involved over 2 hours of natural wakefulness during the night, compared to less than 45 minutes in our light-polluted modern world.
And that 2-hour window, that brings us directly to the historical idea, rather than the evolutionary one, of segmented sleep. This historical model suggests that before the electric light, people deliberately practiced a kind of divided rest.
Yes, historical research, particularly focused on pre-industrial Europe before the late 18th century, suggests that sleeping in a single block was actually uncommon. Sleep was frequently divided into 2 distinct, roughly 4-hour blocks.
The first sleep and the second sleep.
That's what they called them. And in between those 2 blocks, there was this quiet, wakeful interval. It lasted anywhere from 1 to 3 hours, typically right around midnight.
What did people do during that time? It just sounds like such a strange social norm to us now.
But it wasn't treated as insomnia. It was seen as a normal, often productive or contemplative period.
So they weren't panicking about being awake.
Not at all. This wakeful break was deeply social and personal. People would use the time for quiet reflection, meditation, or prayer. They'd engage in intimate social activities, maybe talking quietly with their spouse, or even visiting neighbors.
Visiting neighbors in the middle of the night.
Apparently so. And essential household tasks were completed. Adding logs to the fire, preparing food for the next day, brewing beer even. It was viewed as this time of profound peace and quiet, dedicated to your internal life.
That sounds almost meditative, especially when you compare it to how we react to waking up now, which is usually panic and immediately reaching for a screen.
Mm.
And the end of this ancient pattern, like so many historical shifts, is tied directly to technology.
It is. The shift to our modern consolidated sleep aligned almost perfectly with the proliferation of artificial light sources in the late 18th and early 19th centuries.
Whale oil, coal gas, kerosene, and eventually the electric light bulb.
Right. As light sources became cheaper and more powerful, streets, factories, and homes could be illuminated for much longer.
Which means people naturally stayed up later, and that compressed that wakeful period in the middle of the night.
Exactly. The increased light exposure suppressed that natural midnight awakening, and it just pushed the first sleep and second sleep closer and closer together until they merged into the consolidated 8-hour ideal that we now treat as the biological norm.
We literally engineered our sleep patterns to fit industrial productivity.
We did. Now, in the spirit of a true deep dive, we do have to acknowledge the academic debate around this. While the segmented sleep theory is fascinating, it's not universally accepted as a proven social ritual.
Right, that's an important point for balance.
While the textual evidence, like all those references to first sleep, is compelling, some modern scholars argue that relying solely on these textual fragments risks misinterpretation.
So those terms might not describe a deliberate cultural practice. They might just be describing phases of a continuous sleep process.
Or perhaps even describing the kind of disturbed sleep that we would categorize today as middle or terminal insomnia, especially when you consider the lack of consistent heating and general comfort in pre-industrial homes.
That makes sense.
The ambiguity is important. But whether break-in sleep was a deliberate social ritual, a response to a lack of light, or an evolutionary survival strategy, the central point remains the same.
The idea of forcing 8 hours of uninterrupted unconsciousness is a very new invention.
Very new. The natural human tendency, whether it's through evolution or environment, appears to favor flexibility and fragmentation.
So we've established that waking up in the middle of the night might be this, historical or evolutionary legacy. But for the modern person, what does that mental state actually do to us? If you're lucky, you hit that intense creativity zone.
Right. The quiet hours can provide a unique cognitive advantage because the constraints and the pressures of the day are just gone. This mental state is strongly linked to enhanced creativity, to divergent thinking, and the ability to find complex solutions precisely when the inhibitory filters of the frontal cortex might be slightly reduced.
And history is just full of proof of this nocturnal productivity.
Absolutely. You can consider someone like Franz Kafka, one of the most famously nocturnal writers. He was completely convinced that the silence and darkness brought a clarity and a depth to his writing that was entirely absent during the day. He wrote exclusively at night.
Or Winston Churchill, a man whose schedule was famously dictated by his own internal clock, not by public expectation. He often worked intensely into the early morning hours, reviewing policy papers and military strategy when the entire rest of the cabinet was asleep. He understood that clarity came in the quiet.
And Gustave Flaubert, the French novelist, he maintained a strict routine of only starting his deep writing at 10 p.m. He saw the necessity of avoiding the distractions of the world to achieve true literary focus. They leveraged the night not as downtime, but as peak performance time.
But the mind after midnight has a brutal flip side. When that introspection turns negative, those quiet hours become the perfect breeding ground for anxiety.
And this is when your brain can get stuck in a state of hyperarousal.
Hyperarousal. So that's the physiological state that's associated with insomnia. Your brain is stuck in daytime mode, even though your body is at rest and the environment is quiet.
Your internal system is in a constant state of alert.
And how do we know this isn't just someone feeling stressed? Is there actual physical evidence of this hyperarousal?
Absolutely. We have EEG evidence. Studies show that insomnia patients, even when they're attempting to sleep or just measured while they're awake but lying still, they exhibit significantly higher power in the high-frequency brain bands.
Specifically beta and gamma power. Let's unpack what that means conversationally.
Well, these high-frequency bands, beta and gamma, They're associated with high-level cognitive processing, sensory input processing, active thinking, planning.
So all the stuff your brain is supposed to be doing during the day.
Exactly. When you are attempting to rest, your brain should be transitioning to slower, more restorative frequencies. When these higher frequencies dominate, it means the brain is running a full processing load. It's actively engaged in mulling things over, running scenarios, processing data, and that prevents the slower waves that are needed for genuine rest.
So your brain is essentially failing to switch off the computer, and that leads to that feeling of frantic circular thinking at 3 a.m.
And this hyperarousal isn't just behavioral. We know that insomnia often shares significant genetic risk factors, up to 40% heritability, with traits for anxiety and depression. There's a deeply rooted biological predisposition to that hyperalert state.
This issue of being unable to filter the world is compounded even further for people with sensory processing sensitivity, or SPS.
Yes. SPS is the temperamental trait, and it defines individuals who are highly reactive to environmental stimuli. For someone with SPS, the typical threshold for discomfort is much, much lower.
So trivial inputs, a tiny sliver of light from under the door, a noise from the street, the rough texture of a blanket, are much harder for them to block out.
They are. So even in the quiet of the night, if your nervous system is already frayed from the daytime chaos, those minor residual stimuli keep your system in alert mode. You just can't disengage from your environment.
And that inability to filter the environment keeps the nervous system revved up, which strongly correlates with chronic insomnia symptoms.
Precisely. The lack of sensory filtering contributes directly to the cognitive hyperarousal.
And this heightened state of nocturnal wakefulness, where clarity can so easily become anxiety and where loneliness is amplified, this leads us to the most unsettling piece of data in this entire deep dive.
The mind after midnight hypothesis.
Yeah.
This is a devastating and crucial area of research. The hypothesis suggests that nocturnal wakefulness itself is a significant independent suicide risk factor, and it's likely intertwined with the underlying circadian misalignment and the resulting cognitive state.
What are the numbers here? Because
Yeah.
they are impossible to ignore.
Research reports a threefold higher risk of completed suicide between midnight and 6 a.m. compared to any other 6-hour window during the day.
A threefold higher risk.
This finding is horrifying, and it really demands our full attention when we discuss the vulnerabilities of the mind at night.
That is an overwhelming statistic. Why? Why is this time so vulnerable? What changes about the mind when the clock strikes 1 a.m.?
The theory suggests that several psychological and emotional guards just drop during this time. Firstly, the quiet hours amplify feelings of isolation and hopelessness. Loneliness, without the distraction of daytime activity, it can become overwhelming.
And secondly, the lack of external validation or intervention, just the knowledge that everyone else is asleep, that removes a critical safety net.
It does. And crucially, the cold, rational appraisal of consequences often fades.
So when you are hyper-aroused and cognitively vulnerable.
Exactly. Suicide can emerge as a conceivable singular escape route from overwhelming pain before the full costs and implications are rationally considered. It really highlights that the mind operating between midnight and dawn is governed by profoundly different and often darker emotional and cognitive parameters than the mind active during the day. It's a time of extreme emotional exposure.
So we've established this deep conflict. Our biology is ancient, it's diverse, it's hardwired. You cannot just decide to change your chronotype.
You can't.
But the schedule we all adhere to is a mutable social invention. This leads us to the critical conclusion. We have to challenge the rigid schedules we impose on ourselves.
In a modern knowledge-based economy, respecting circadian diversity isn't a kindness or a luxury for employees. It's a strategic economic necessity. If you want sustainable high-level performance and reduced health costs, you have to align the work structure with the human being inside it.
This is where chrono leadership steps in. What does that actually look like in practice?
It's a leadership approach that's founded on biological understanding. It means designing work structures that intentionally align with employee circadian rhythms.
So instead of demanding synchronized start times,
You optimize task assignments for peak cognitive periods. You reserve those high-level analytical tasks for the night owl's afternoon surge, and you focus on routine coordination for the early bird's morning peak.
this requires a massive foundational cultural shift, though, away from presenteeism and toward trust and measurable output. If a company truly embraces chrono leadership, they have to trust that the late chronotype is intensely productive at 10 p.m., even if their office chair is empty at 8 a.m.
That trust is the absolute linchpin. We need authenticity, empathy, and logic from leadership to make this work. When people are allowed to work in sync with their internal clocks, the documented benefits are clear.
What are they?
Higher performance quality, reduced burnout, increased well-being, and actually better collaboration because employees feel respected and leveraged optimally. We're optimizing human capital based on hard science, not on tradition.
And the need for this flexibility isn't just confined to the office. Cities themselves are starting to recognize the massive economic and social power of the late hours.
Yes, moving toward the 24-hour city model.
The nighttime economy is far bigger than most people realize, isn't it?
It's massive. For example, New York City's nighttime industry generates tens of billions of dollars annually. And the UK's nighttime economy contributes an estimated £94 billion every year. This is a huge area of commerce that requires support and infrastructure.
And this movement is about more than just entertainment. It's about safety and inclusion for the hundreds of thousands of people whose schedules must operate outside that 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. norm.
The emergency services, healthcare workers, hospitality staff,
Sure.
factory shift workers, activating services 24/7, improving public transportation flow, ensuring public spaces are well lit and monitored. It makes the city safer and more accessible for everyone who is biologically or professionally mandated to operate at night.
And this urban evolution is being led by these new specialized roles like nightmares.
Exactly. People who are tasked with integrating the city's life across the entire 24-hour cycle, dismantling those conventional linear planning models.
Okay, so let's move to the individual level. The path to personal alignment, it has to start with simple self-knowledge, which we hope this deep dive provides. You need to identify your own chronotype and then respect it.
Understanding when your peak focus time occurs is the first step toward reducing that social jet lag. For instance, if you recognize that your cognitive peak is late in the evening, you have to consciously reserve your most complex, deep-thinking tasks for those hours.
Don't waste your intellectual surge on routine maintenance or easy administrative tasks.
No. Save those for your suboptimal windows.
And finally, regardless of your genetics, everyone benefits from mastering basic sleep hygiene. If your chronotype is already struggling against the social clock, you need to minimize the self-inflicted damage.
This includes maintaining a consistent sleep and wake time, even on weekends, to help stabilize your internal rhythm. Ensuring your bedroom is cool, dark, and quiet, minimizing any of those residual SPS triggers we talked about.
And perhaps most critical, breaking the blue light habit.
The electronic devices used during revenge bedtime procrastination actively suppress melatonin release and push your sleep cycle later, which just ensures that cycle of stress and sleep deprivation continues.
So the very quiet, personal time you crave is often undermined by the technology you use to enjoy it. It's a conscious battle against the light we now all carry in our pockets.
So if you are one of the millions of people listening to us right now, awake in the quiet hours past midnight, remember this central realization. Your internal clock is a powerful, genetically determined force, and it is often in direct, painful conflict with a modern world that demands a schedule invented for the convenience of machinery, not for the health of humans.
That moment of middle of the night wakefulness, that feeling that your brain needs to be active, it shouldn't be instantly labeled as a disorder unless it's causing profound distress or impairment in your life. It may, in fact, be the ghost of a natural fragmented rhythm or an ancestral sentinel duty, suppressed by centuries of relentless artificial light and rigid societal demands. You are not broken, your rhythm is simply different.
And if we accept the sentinel hypothesis, our group living ancestors only slept safely because someone, often the leader or earlier chronotypes, was always awake, filling those vulnerable hours.
So if the modern world, with its consolidated schedules, forces everyone to try and achieve that fragile, perfect 8-hour ideal at the exact same time, are we trading ancestral safety, biological diversity, and profound nocturnal introspection for a dangerously synchronized vulnerability?
What are we truly sacrificing when the whole world conspires to go dark at the exact same moment? It's a provocative question to consider the next time you find yourself alone and fully conscious in the deepest, most honest hours after midnight.